Okay, hello, and welcome to this eCampus News webinar, Empowering Educators with Science of Reading Expertise. My name is Kevin Hogan. I am the Content Director for eCampus News, and I am happy you are joining us today for what I know will be a very insightful and important conversation. The conversation is brought to you by Public Consulting Group. For over 3 decades, PCG has been dedicated to one pursuit: delivering solutions that matter. PCG is a leading public sector solutions implementation and operations improvement firm that partners with health, education, and human services agencies to improve lives. The company has 4 designated areas of expertise: education, health, human services, and technology, each with a proven track record of achieving results for clients. They often combine resources from 2 or more practice areas to offer a multidisciplinary approach to solve client challenges and favor long-term client relationships, which allows them to work towards systemic, sustainable solutions that are more efficient and effective in the long term. Now, before we dig into the webinar, I'd like to take a minute to go over some of the features of the platform that we're using. This event is being recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing anything. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with a PDF of the slides. If you have a question or comment for us, there's the chat function down there at the bottom that you can launch. Feel free to use this feature to contact someone from the eCampus News team if you have a technical question, but also if you have an idea or a thought that you want to contribute to the conversation. I know our panelists appreciate those because it helps us steer the conversation in the direction that you want. So with these housekeeping items out of the way, we can get started with some introductions. First up, Katie Garrett. Katie is an instructional coach from the North Wasco County School District in Oregon. She has spent 20 years as a classroom teacher, 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grades, 3 years as an instructional coach, 1 year as a fellow for the Great Minds PBC. She has a BA from Oregon State University, a master's from George Fox University, and is currently a master's of education student at the University of Oregon. Go Ducks. Next up, Robert Frantum Allen. Robert is a distinguished leader with deep expertise in literacy, early childhood education, special education, and leadership. With over 33 years in education, including as Director of Special Education for Denver Public Schools, Robert has championed the science of reading, promoting evidence-based literacy practices. He continues to teach at the University of Denver and consults nationally on literacy development and education. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Ronda Fritz. Ronda is an associate professor of education at Eastern Oregon University. She is also the founder and executive director of the Eastern Oregon University Reading Clinic. She has worked in education for 32 years in various positions, including elementary and middle school education, as well as reading specialist. She earned her PhD in special education, studying prevention and intervention of reading difficulties, as well as teacher preparation. She is now committed to ensuring that pre-service and in-service teachers receive the training and support they need to be master teachers of literacy. So thanks all for joining us today. I really appreciate you sharing your time and your insights to this really valuable topic. I guess, again, before we get started, maybe we'll ask the audience a couple questions so our panelists can have a better idea of where you are in this idea of the science of reading. Chris, if you could throw up the first poll question, please. So what topics do you recall learning about when you went to college to become an educator? And this is at the danger of dating both ourselves and the audience, but it could go back quite a ways. Is it linguistics, phonology, semantics, syntax, or oral language development? And I know over the past decades, there have been many developments happening in the colleges of education, and a lot of catchphrases and a lot of fads of things that go in and out, but this is not one of them. So we'll give you a few seconds to answer that question before we throw up a poll question number 2. Maybe as we wait, Robert, any of those topics do you recall learning?
Well, for me particularly, yes, but my undergraduate degree was in speech communications. So linguistics, phonology, syntax, and semantics, oral language development was all a part of it. And I had an emphasis in communication disorders. My interest was really in deaf education. Was a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing for a good number of years, started as a sign language interpreter, then became a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. And so part of the disability of deafness is really a language deficit. And so that's why I happen to have a background in those subject areas.
Interesting. All right. So Chris, I guess maybe if you could pop up poll question number 2, and that can give us a little bit more insight. What is one evidence-based instructional strategy you teach or have witnessed in a classroom? And these particular topics are well above my pay grade, but Rhonda, when you look at those, do those all look familiar to you?
They do. I would say we're seeing it more recently, but some of these things, I think when I first started teaching in particular, I would have had no idea that that was something I should have been doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. And with that, I guess as we collect that data, and then we can use that, and our panelists can see, and then we'll help drive the conversation. So I appreciate that. But maybe, Chris, we can start with the video to get us rolling.
In the heart of Eastern Oregon, a revolution in reading is underway. A diverse group of school districts are overcoming challenges with innovative reading clinics, transforming students' lives one word at a time. For the last decade, Oregon has faced significant reading challenges. Diverse population needs, a rural landscape, and varied socioeconomic backgrounds have made achieving literacy a complex issue, especially since students in rural settings have limited access to varied instructional literacy supports. But through a new early literacy framework and a strong commitment from state leaders, we saw an opportunity to innovate, and we took it. In 2023, the Oregon legislature established early literacy as a top priority and passed legislation aligned with the science of reading. The goal, to increase access to early literacy learning through support that is research-aligned, culturally responsive, student-centered, and family-oriented. Eastern Oregon University has chosen to proactively address reading challenges through their reading clinic. Aligned with the International Dyslexia Association standards, Eastern Oregon University's reading clinic offers structured literacy instruction, ongoing professional development, and community outreach initiatives. Modeled in part after the Reading Clinic in Washington, D.C., Eastern Oregon University's clinic is guided by current research and local needs. While the D.C. Reading Clinic serves urban and suburban populations, Eastern Oregon University's clinic focuses more on rural populations. Join us in a panel discussion on developing a reading clinic at your university, school district, or as part of your teacher preparation program. Gain insights into addressing literacy disparities, supporting educators with effective literacy instruction, and empowering students with dyslexia and other reading difficulties. Eastern Oregon University's Reading Clinic is more than a program. It's a commitment to education, a commitment to empowerment, and a commitment to excellence. Welcome to Eastern Oregon University's Reading Clinic, where evidence-based strategies are making literacy accessible to all. From rural towns to bustling cities, our approach is tailored to meet the needs of every student. Eastern Oregon University, where access to equitable literacy instruction meets community needs.
All right, well, good stuff. And I guess the best place to start, I believe, would be with you, Rhonda, as this is your charge, right? I mean, this is what you founded over the past few years. Maybe you can expand a little bit about your work there at the program.
Yeah, when I first envisioned what a reading clinic would look like, I was really thinking about where can I provide some experiences with my pre-service teachers where they can practice what they're learning in the classroom. we were teaching structured literacy methods, and then they were going into schools and seeing the opposite and no structured literacy at all. So we really needed a place for them to practice. So that was my original intent. And during my sabbatical, which happened to land during the pandemic, I started researching different reading clinic options and ran into that DC Reading Clinic online, and got to connect with that director and find out that their main goal was to train teachers, although they were also serving children in their clinics as well. But that's when it dawned on me that perhaps we needed a dual purpose sort of clinic where we were training in-service teachers, so that then my pre-service teachers would have somewhere to see it being applied in the classroom. And so that's how the clinic kind of was born, as teacher training with just some side benefits of providing services for students. Since that time, we've also added additional tutoring we now have a tutor services director that hires tutors for us, and we go into schools and provide some direct services in addition to the teachers training. But we've really started to grow into our dual purpose of both educating educators and providing services for kids.
Great stuff. Thank you. And Robert, maybe you can talk a little bit about PCG's involvement and how that relationship began.
Yeah, and I think it really kind of stemmed from a lot of requests of Rhonda to come out and provide professional development, while her number one charge was really to focus on teaching those pre-service teachers and using the clinic to support that. So she had pretty limited capacity. She got word of a course that we had developed for the state of Colorado to meet the requirements of the Colorado READ Act, which required all educators that are responsible for teaching reading in the state of Colorado to receive 45 hours of training in the science of reading. And we found that this would be a perfect partnership where we funnel our coursework through the reading clinic and then disseminate that throughout the state of Oregon. Our course is an asynchronous course with facilitation guides that school leaders and school coaches can use and follow along to facilitate professional learning communities within their school site. And so we are excited because it helps the reading clinic meet its vision of servicing pre-service teachers and servicing the community. And now they can provide support at the school level in the in-service training for teachers to kind of get those that didn't receive that background training previously in their pre-service, but now through the in-service venue.
Yeah. And Katie, you are the third leg of the stool here of this really kind of distinctive and interesting initiative. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your involvement and how your work is intertwined.
Yeah, absolutely. So we at North Wasco County School District, we received the Early Literacy Success School District grant through the state. And from there, there's a portion of that that includes professional learning and coaching. And so our Director of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, Shannon Brennan, made contact with Rhonda at Eastern Oregon University. And we started with a cohort of just our Title I teachers, myself as a coach, and Shannon as our director. And we all just kind of went through the course together. And there's a portion, as Robert referenced, there in the facilitator's guide, we come together, we do the asynchronous work, and then we come together and we discuss kind of our learnings for each module. And so my role was to be the facilitator and the learner at the same time. But we've now rolled out a cohort 2 that we did over the summer. And we are currently in our third and largest cohort that we have going on right now. And we have plans for a cohort 4 following that.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I guess before we get too deep into the weeds here, we might want to set up with an original question talking about what exactly is the science of reading, right? Like many phrases in education, you can have various descriptions, and they could be 8 different. So maybe I'll put you each on the hot seat here to talk about what your particular definition is of the science of reading. Rhonda, maybe I'll put you on that hot seat first.
Great, thanks. So the science of reading is really a vast body of research that expands over 50 plus years of reading research that has brought us to some pretty stable conclusions, in that explicit instruction in all of the different elements of literacy is critical. And especially that we provide really explicit instruction in foundational skills, while at the same time building knowledge and language comprehension across the same time frame. So I think it's just a huge body of research that is not just educational research, but coming from many different fields that have sort of converged on the same conclusions or similar conclusions.
Yeah, so that's a great definition of kind of the big picture. Robert, maybe you could talk a little bit about some examples of evidence-based practices that are a part of that canon of the science of reading.
Absolutely. The impetus for this was really the National Reading Panel that came out in 1999. Major meta-analysis that looked again at every piece of scientific evidence that met the criteria of actually being done in a scientific manner, peer-reviewed and replicable, and those type of pieces. And they came to the conclusion that there are 5 elements that must be a part of any literacy program. Phonological awareness, phonics/spelling, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. As of late, many people all of a sudden think of the science of reading as being equated with the science of phonics and the introduction of phonics. But one of the things we like to point out is, no, there is also the science of reading comprehension, the science of vocabulary. And there's a lot of evidence out there that has kind of brought this together. For example, when we come to decode an unknown word, really the most efficient strategy is to sound out that word, right? It's something that we call orthographic mapping. We map out the speech sounds that are associated with the graphemes on that particular word, right? So that would be an example, which really leads to, yes, phonics and spelling instruction is evidence-based and is something that needs to be taught in a direct, explicit, systematic, sequential, multi-sensory, and fun manner. But then on the other end, we look at, say, vocabulary development, and what does evidence-based strategies say that will help to increase a student's vocabulary, right? And we can really break it down into indirect methods, direct methods, and building a word consciousness out there. So for example, a direct method of teaching vocabulary is following a system, a 6-step process where we might introduce the word, practice how to say the word, do an analysis of that word, come up with a definition, use it in an example, those type of pieces, versus an indirect method. A lot of research is showing the read aloud is a very effective way to build vocabulary skills in children. So that's just a couple of examples, one on the word level reading side and the other on that language comprehension side.
And Rhonda, I'm going to say that it seems as part of your mission at EOU is to take these concepts, these high-minded concepts, these abstract, esoteric concepts, and impart upon your students and ultimately Katie's faculty how to apply those in a day-to-day setup. Is that accurate? Oh, you're on mute. Have to have
Yes,
one.
I would definitely agree with that. And it actually made my heart just very warm to hear Katie talk about what they're doing at North Wasco County, because that really is the model I would like all schools to use when they're doing any kind of professional development around the science of reading. It's one thing to learn the content and understand the concepts, but it's a completely different thing to apply it in your classroom and see that work with kids. So I think coupling those two is a critical piece of developing your staff and developing our pre-service teachers. When they have that chance to actually practice with students, that takes them to a completely different level of understanding.
And Katie, maybe can you go into a little bit more detail of what these sort of applications mean and kind of a day-to-day? Can you give us a little bit of the day in the life of a teacher?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as I mentioned, our first cohort that went through this last year were Title I teachers and one special education teacher. And then we had a second cohort of teachers who went through the summer. So they're just now getting the chance to apply their learning with their current students. So, but what I have heard and what I've seen from many of the teachers that I've talked to and that I've worked with is that they're, just like Rhonda said, they're not pre-service teachers, they're in-service teachers, and they're able to take this new learning and then apply it to the current curriculums that we're asked to use and see where does this fit in, what components can I not skip that are maybe I was skipping and I didn't think were as important, and really focusing on the instructional strategies that will hit each of the 5 components that Robert was talking about. They've talked about how it helps them to question some of their former practices and some of their former thinking as well, and really causing them to reflect on old patterns of thinking and how they need to begin to shift. And it's a slow process. There's many factors involved, but we just actually had our first in-person session last night with our cohort 3, and it's our biggest group so far. And I just walked away with just a sense of pride almost, that like, man, we're doing this. With the conversations that arose, the feedback that we were given, it was really inspiring to hear that teachers were saying, oh, wow, now I get it. Now I understand. And they seem excited to then implement. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. Now, Robert, you see a lot of different programs around the country, a lot of different institutions. Anything that makes EOU distinct from your point of view?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. A lot of times at the university level, the focus tends to be on the theoretical. Sometimes at the university level, we're really looking at addressing a broad range of skills and knowledge. There's a lot of competition for what we need to do to get in front of teachers or what students need to know. Math is important, writing is important, science and social studies is important as well too. But one of the things that makes EOU unique is that focus, that central focus in on what has science shown us. And they're going into this from that point of view of it's not just educational science, but what does cognitive neuroscience say? Right. Quite frankly, as teachers, we should be experts in the brain and how the brain processes, because the brain is necessary for learning. And so they're going to dive into the regions of the brain that are important for processing language and looking at fMRI scans to see the differences between dyslexic and non-dyslexic brains. But then also bringing in other disciplines, the discipline of speech language pathology, for example. They're the experts in understanding the 44 phonemes of English, right? And helping to support students in developing mouth awareness, which develops meta-linguistic understanding of our speech sounds, which is critical when we have to go to match those speech sounds to letters or letter combinations that are graphemes. And so I think that's one of the very unique pieces. It's not just about what do we learn and do in education, but what are we learning from cognitive science, neuroscience, from speech language pathology, special education, dyslexia studies, disability studies, implementation science, universal design for learning. It's an interdisciplinary process that brings all of these fields together to help us develop a much deeper understanding of how an individual learns to read and how a teacher can most effectively teach them how to read.
Well, that's a whole lot. And then you add in, Rhonda, the past couple of years, you mentioned the pandemic and starting the program during the pandemic. As we sit here, there's still we're still grappling with a lot of issues as a result of that, especially in early education and early literacy. Maybe you can talk about the connection between the pre-service and working with professionals in the pre-service to in-service teachers. Is that also something that you find to be of particular importance?
Yeah, and I think the timing was actually quite perfect because we were launching this at a time when teachers were really hungry for solutions and trying to help these kiddos that came in behind and were struggling to catch up. So I think that piece was really just some serendipitous timing that we couldn't have anticipated. But I think, that whole progression from pre-service to in-service, when we can provide them with a really solid foundation in pre-service, we're not saying that they are expert teachers of literacy when they leave us. So there really is still so much room for growth once they have their licenses, even when they receive that foundation. And having that foundation of understanding that they can build on is only going to help those students in front of them that need their help the most, and help them to understand how they can tailor instruction to meet the needs of all the kiddos in their classrooms. So I think all of it is woven in together, and we can just build on that basic knowledge they get in pre-service to help them really meet the needs of all of the kids in their classrooms.
Yeah. And Katie, your description of your meeting last night was just really, really positive. Just where I sit every day, we talk about the frustrations of faculty and teachers and the teacher shortages and teacher burnout, especially over the past 4 years. Talk a little bit about how you have a culture where you have your teachers excited, and how that is, in connection with the work of PCG and with the EOU.
Well, being that we did receive a grant, there's a little bit of monetary, carrot there for people. So that gets them hooked, I think, initially. And then I think just from again, the feedback that I'm hearing, I would have to say that it's just the learning that they're getting from the experience. And I think, the model of doing some things individually and kind of assessing where you are in your understanding on your own as you're working through it, and then the power of bringing those people back together to discuss and synthesize what they're learning. I often say that, I'm teaching a class tonight, but I'm not really teaching anything. All I'm is facilitating the conversation, and using the facilitators guides that have been provided. There's really rich discussion opportunities. There's a lot of opportunity for the teachers to reflect, and I think that's one thing a lot of times teachers don't have the time to do. And so giving them the space and the opportunity to do that, and then also collaborate. Last night, one thing we did was we put job-alike people together to talk. So K1 teachers, you're talking, 3-5 teachers, you're talking, coaches, you're talking, administrators, you're talking, and how does this apply to their role right now? And I think that generates a lot of enthusiasm too, that we can get the ideas flowing, the juices flowing of like, how can we then start to make these shifts in our practices for the sake of the kids. So
yeah. Robert, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you are working with the particular curriculum you have from that pre-service up until the in-service teacher levels.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One, we're gonna try something with Rhonda in her next cohort of students, where they're actually going to use our 45-hour asynchronous course as their textbook. And that it will be in the form of what we would call a flipped classroom, where the students will actually go in and complete sections and portions of the asynchronous learning, so that when they actually come together face to face, they're going to dive more into how do we translate this into classroom actions, classroom behaviors, classroom instruction. So, for example, if they're going to be learning a little bit about how do we map out our speech sounds and then associate graphemes to that, and they're going to learn an instructional strategy called phoneme grapheme mapping, then when they come into the classroom, they're actually going to practice it. They're actually going to practice what that is like, and maybe, perhaps even practicing with each other. Right. Or if they're learning a little bit about a vocabulary strategy called gradients, vocabulary gradients, where you take two opposite words, but you create a whole bunch of words that fit in the middle, and all of a sudden you now developed a much larger vocabulary. So then they might go in the classroom and do some of that vocabulary gradients, meeting gradients, so they can practice those strategies they would actually use with the students directly as well too. So I think that's one really exciting piece there. When it comes to the pre-service work, I think a lot of things, even the pandemic, has risen our awareness to other instructional strategies for adults that perhaps we may not have used as much in the past. And one would be that flipped classroom process, because what we really want to do is build knowledge, then understanding, and then application of that. And one of the things that we find often missing in higher ed is we got the knowledge. We might dive into some understanding, but there aren't opportunities to practice that. And I think, one, through the reading clinic, and two, through a flipped classroom process, we're going to see pre-service teachers having more and more of that practice. And then those exact same strategies are also how we're addressing it in the in-service as well too. So, so as Katie is facilitating that, but there might be an activity where, all right, let's read this article by this, reading scientist to see how they interpret it. And then let's do a turn and talk with each other to go, all right, what did we learn from that? And then we come together and have a discussion. Well, what does that mean for what I'm going to do tomorrow in the classroom? What changes do I need to make within that process as well too? And then the other piece is there's just content knowledge that we all need that we didn't get that. So at the very beginning, the first poll you had was, what are some skills that you need to know? Well, there are some basic skills we need to know. There's 44 speech sounds in English. There are 270 ways to spell those speech sounds. But we really need to focus on the 70 most frequent ways to spell those. And one of the biggest misconceptions that is out there is that English is irregular. It's too irregular, so it doesn't make sense to teach phonics. But in actuality, it's very regular. I mean, back in 1966, Hannah, Hodges, and Rudolph developed a computer algorithm to put English words in to see if they are actually regular or irregular. Turns out nearly 95% of all words in English are regular. But when I, say basic things like, do you know the 6 reasons for a silent E at the end of an English word? Why is there a silent E at the end of the word house? And most educators don't know that because they never received the training in it. So why is there a silent E at the end of the word house? Well, the word house ends in the sound S, and it's spelled with an S. But our minds have been conditioned, if you see an S at the end of a word, must be plural. So we're going to put a silent E there to tell you it's not plural, right? So that's an example of that. Or why is there a silent E at the end of the word cake? Well, there's the E reaches around the consonant, pinches the vowel, and the vowel says their name. So it's a long vowel spelling. But once you know those rules, you come to find out that English is actually quite regular. And it becomes a powerful strategy for then students to become more effective at decoding unknown words and spelling unknown words correctly. And so another part of that is that content knowledge. So it's not just about teaching it, but you got to know what you're going to be teaching and then how to teach that effectively through direct, explicit, systematic methods as well too. So a lot of the curriculum that we have developed in the training that they are utilizing both in pre-service and in-service is teaching the content knowledge, and how do we teach that content knowledge in the most effective manner possible.
Excellent. A question from the audience has come in, and I guess it's a question for each of you. Maybe I'll go with you, Rhonda, first on this, but can you share specific examples of what teachers are doing in class? Like, just kind of give us like a fly on the wall of how these concepts are being applied.
Yeah, I think for the in-service teachers that I work with, one of the most common things that they take away from it that they maybe didn't have training in before was what Rob was talking about in terms of explicit systematic instruction. So one thing that you might see that what maybe wasn't there before is a teacher directly teaching, say, one of those spelling patterns that Rob was talking about. So they're going to be very explicit in the way that they say IGH represents that I sound. They're going to explicitly teach that, rather than what you might have seen previously is they've read a lot of books with words that have this IGH in it, and we're hoping that kids will just miraculously learn that that's how you spell that I sound in some words. So I think seeing that direct explicit instruction in multiple different areas is one thing that you would see in a classroom.
Great. And Robert, you were mentioning the flipped classroom, which is another great kind of theoretical aspect that we've been talking about, and now was applied whether we liked it or not during the pandemic, and it sounds like they're going to continue to use it now. But so what you're talking there is that, will the students be using your curriculum at home and then coming in for group discussion? Is that, am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, our curriculum is really for the adults, right? So the 45 hours of training is very specific for the adults. But the other thing we want to really be thinking about are the instructional resource materials that we have been given. And are those instructional resource materials aligned to the evidence-based practices in the settled science that we call the science of reading? So science of reading is not a methodology. It's not a philosophy. It's not an approach. It literally is a body of evidence to say, this is what we know about reading, and this is what we know works in the most efficient manner. If you're looking for a methodology, then we would call structured literacy or multisensory structured literacy as the methodology. And I think another important element that is critical for school leaders and teachers is to understand, how do I look at my instructional materials and how do I determine if it is actually aligned to the science of reading? And the good news is there's more and more supports coming about to help educators in making that determination. The National Reading League has just unveiled some supports, one pretty much a checklist or a rubric that educators can use to determine if their curriculum is aligned. And then also some really deep analysis of some of the big name products out there with a very honest analysis and review of what seems to be aligned and what is not aligned, which then helps to guide school decision makers in choosing the most appropriate product as well too. But just like one of the people who is in the heart of the science of reading, Dr. Louisa Moats, she says programs don't teach students how to read, teachers teach students how to read. And I think it becomes very important for us to invest our time in pre-service and in-service teachers, unveiling the mysteries of reading that they did not receive before, so that they can be much better critical consumers of any instructional resource materials that they have been given out there as well too. I essentially say there is no predetermined, pre-written curriculum that works, right? Because every student is different. Every teacher comes in with a different piece of background knowledge that is there. But once we become critical consumers, then we know how to address those gaps within our instructional resource materials to better support students across the board.
Great, thank you for that. Another question from the audience. How does what you are sharing about empowering educators with the science of reading, how is that similar to or aligned with the LETRS, Language Essentials of Teachers of Reading and Spelling? Some states are requiring all K-6 teachers to take this training as it relates to the science of reading. And I guess that kind of blends into a question I had too about, we're talking specifically about Oregon here, but this is a phenomenon that's kind of sprouting out around the country. So I'll open it up to all of our panelists here who want to answer that question.
I'll jump in with that because I'm actually a letters trainer. So Language Essentials for Teaching of Reading and Spelling was a letters trainer in the state of Colorado, particularly for Denver Public Schools for a good number of years. Our product, as well as letters, we pretty much are teaching the same content, right? We're aligned with the International Dyslexia Association knowledge and practice standards, which really sets the foundation for the science of reading. And that is done through the Center for Effective Reading. So there are multiple professional learnings across the country that are all accredited by the International Dyslexia Association, and they pretty much teach the same elements. I think one of the things that we like to highlight is going beyond the what and the why of the science of reading, but how do you actually apply that within the classroom? And that's one of the things that we like to really focus in on. We have at least over 100 instructional strategies that we introduce within our set of modules. And, one of the things that we can offer beyond the asynchronous is synchronous opportunities in person or through a webinar to really pull out those instructional strategies and practice them to deepen our knowledge, and then offer supports through coaching to go in and help guide teachers in practicing those instructional strategies until they become completely ingrained out there as well too. So I think the critical thing is you want to look for, is this professional development aligned with the knowledge and practice standards set forth by the International Dyslexia Association? If it is, then you can feel pretty confident that your teachers, whether pre-service or in-service, are going to be receiving the most updated information that comes from that bank of scientifically validated practices.
Yeah, and Rhonda, I guess all these various strategies and philosophies and curriculums that come in, and that's something that you need to juggle in the program, right? Can you talk a little bit about how you address all of those things and continue to manage that as things continuously change?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we definitely want to make sure our teacher candidates know and understand, that the science is continually evolving. So what we know today is likely to change in the future as we get better and better at what we're doing, but to always keep your eye on that science. And you mentioned the word philosophy, which is really how many people, including myself, were trained on a philosophy of reading that was not necessarily validated. It was not validated by scientific evidence. So we try to steer them clear of just philosophies. We want them to make decisions about what they're teaching based on what the science tells us, not what someone thinks or believes might be a great way to teach. So I think that is one of the underlying concepts we want to make sure our candidates understand.
Great. Another question coming in from the audience. This is great. I appreciate all these questions. Can you speak to the educator prep side of this a little bit more? How can EPPs and TPPs do more to prepare pre-service teachers for the science of reading instruction, particularly in states where these curricula are being mandated?
Yeah, I think I can speak to that because we did have to make that shift in our program, and it's taken us about 5 years to fully make the shift to follow what the science tells us, because I walked into a balanced literacy curriculum when I got here. And so we have had to make that shift. And what that has meant is really prioritizing time and credits toward giving them this foundation, because it's not fast. It's not something we could just give them in 5 weeks or 10 weeks. It really needs to be something that they're learning across a year. And I would say the other piece of that, which you spoke to a little bit, was that practical side, that once they have learned these concepts, then also embedding a practicum that is focused on literacy in particular, so that they can practice what they've learned. So Rob mentioned that they're practicing with each other during coursework, but then at the end of the year in the spring, our students are then actually going into the schools and working with students. So I think all of those pieces are super important. And I also want to highlight what Rob said about the IDA knowledge and practice standards. When you're thinking about shifting your syllabi, really lean heavily on those standards, because they can really help you shape your classes to make sure that your students have what they need by the end of their program.
And if I could add a couple other tips onto that for higher ed as well too. We have actually spent quite a bit of time talking to various professors and getting to know what some of the challenges are as they begin to shift from some of their more legacy type of methods classes for teaching reading to ones that, quite frankly, are being mandated quite a bit across the state. And each state's have different sets of regulations they put in place. I'm in Colorado. I teach at the University of Denver. We just recently had an audit done by Colorado Department of Education, and a part of that audit was, are your syllabi and are your coursework aligned to the science of reading? And we find, some professors, they're just like, well, I don't know it. How can I turn around and teach it if I don't know it? And so one of the things that is critical is, how can we support professors in developing their knowledge around it? And even just taking an IDA aligned course is going to help to build their background knowledge as well too. And then, doing something like a flipped classroom from a product that has already been well developed, vetted, accredited by IDA, and making that as a part of their program can help them to also begin to shift in those directions as well too. So we've got to recognize that, yes, this is going to be a challenge. This has not been the standard for the longest time, but now with so much increased awareness, with podcasts that are explaining these issues, stories that are happening, legislators getting involved to really want to improve our literacy rates across the country. We got to learn we got to recognize this is a learning curve for everybody, including those that are in higher ed, so that they can provide a stronger foundation for teachers as well too. And one of the things that I'd say is, one of the things I love about working for PCG is we're thought leaders. Whenever there's an issue that comes up, we're more than happy to sit down and think through what are some of the challenges that you have, and what are some things that we could do to help overcome some of those challenges as well.
Yeah. Now, Katie, I know there's a number of folks here in the audience who are probably thinking, like, how can I involve my own district in a relationship similar to the one that you have with Eastern Oregon? Can you talk a little bit about, well, obviously, as you mentioned before, the grant helps, right? That's number one. But any other pieces of advice about kind of taking that and improving a relationship, say, maybe with your local regional education college?
Ooh, can you restate that maybe? I'm not sure I quite follow.
It seems like it's you have a dynamic relationship with that program that maybe a lot of districts don't have, or who would like to begin to have. And was that something that you reached out for, or was it something that they reached out to you? Or talk a little bit about how to begin creating that sort of relationship.
Okay. Well, I think we have, as someone mentioned, there's a little bit of serendipity happening. That we had a current staff member who was taking classes or is taking classes through Eastern Oregon and knew of Rhonda, and she was very inspired by Rhonda herself and said, "Oh, I have to tell you about this woman who does this thing in Eastern Oregon, and you must know about it." And she very much encouraged our director to then consider this. And then that was how that all began. Then our director reached out to Rhonda, and it was, I think, again, just a very prime time for this. It was right as the courses were rolling out. And I think that it just immediately became a thing. And it's great too, because we are geographically, we're not far from Eastern Oregon, a couple of hours. We are considered a rural community as well, as where Eastern Oregon is located. And so there were just, it was a kind of a perfect match that what they were creating met the need in our district. And we have a lot of teachers that are coming, same as you mentioned at the very beginning, we have teacher shortages, we have a lot of emergency teachers, we have a lot of new teachers, and we knew, and then we also have a lot of teachers who've been here for a very long time as well. And so it was sort of, all the conditions were just sort of perfect for us to jump on this opportunity.
And if I could add something also on Kevin, as well too, I think one of the critical issues here as well too is that EOU is supporting the rural regions of the state. And, large urban school districts tend to have more resources, AKA money, to be able to purchase things like this. But in a rural setting, it's much more of a struggle. We usually don't have that robust amount of money. So by partnering maybe with a university like EOU, and then partnering with a company like PCG, we're now able to reach out to those rural teachers and those students in a rural region and get them more equitable resources that they can't compete with in a large urban school district as well too. And it doesn't have to be a university. It could also be a cooperative, like a board of cooperative education that is serving multiple school districts. And by combining what little money they have, they can now become more competitive with larger districts as well too. So that's one other thing to think about. If there are universities out there where you are already providing science of reading instruction to your teachers, but maybe you might be inspired to then go beyond that and also have a mission to support students in the community, and then also a mission to support that in service, particularly in those rural regions as well.
Yeah. Now, I knew the toughest part of my job this afternoon would be to end the conversation. There's so many aspects and so many layers that we can go on. But Rhonda, I might leave it for you to have a little bit of the last word for, again, our audience on maybe they wanted to try to take their own programs to this kind of next level that we've taken it, and give them some ideas and some first steps in terms of doing that.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things about getting this started really was finding those people that are willing to partner with you. One of my first partnerships was with a regional educator network that still supports a lot of our work. Here in Oregon, those regional educator networks are for professional development. And so that was an easy partnership for us. So finding out where those K-12 partners lie is one really important piece of that. And then I think there is some piece of that inspiring that a group of people, because when I first started with teacher training, I started with a core group of about 6 people that I trained to be my mentors in my hybrid clinic that I run. And those people then became the spokespeople. And like Katie said, I had a student from North Wasco that was in my graduate program, and she became inspired, and I think also became empowered. And that's one thing I wanted to say about the teacher shortage piece. When I first started, I had a few people saying, oh, teachers have too much on their plates. They don't want to take this on. But what I found was that when teachers started to understand ways that they could be more effective with their students, then they felt empowered and wanted to stay with the profession. Some of those people were ready to be just done, especially right after the pandemic. They'd had enough. They really didn't think they wanted to take anything else on. But when they learned some really effective methods for meeting the needs of kids in their classrooms, it did empower them and made them rethink that possibility of leaving the profession. So I think don't underestimate the dedication of teachers. They're amazing and they want what's best for their kids. And so if you have an inkling of providing this kind of support, I would say run with it. But I also would say that it really is important that we really also look at the same time with pre-service so that we're making sure that is solid and that we have provided our pre-service candidates with as much as we possibly can so that we're not continually having to retrain teachers in the field. So I think there's many layers, and I would also say it's okay if it's just you, because we really started with just me. And I started to build my people around me. So that has been helpful. And also find your community of people. Reach out to me. I know many professors that are trying to do this work. So I'm happy to connect you with those who are doing the same thing, so you don't feel like you're the lone wolf at your university.
Well, at the top of the hour, I didn't think I'd be as inspired and as empowered talking about the science of reading, but we got in deep, and I think we really found what's the important part is inspiring our faculty to help our students. So again, I'd really like to thank the panel for a really informative and inspiring presentation. And thanks to all the audience members for their great questions. It really shows that you were really engaged, and I hope got a lot out of this conversation. So as a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. Thanks again for participating, and have a great day.